Here we go. Good morning, everyone. Fred Schwartz here, Executive Director of the Solar Valley Consortium. On behalf of our co-chairs, Drs. Ronald O. Loveridge and Alfredo Martinez Morales, I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar focused on the topic of community solar. Our world is currently being driven by ever more extreme climate conditions. Heat waves, hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, wildfires, and sea level rise are all artifacts of the warming climate, and our region is being especially hard hit. According to Climate Central, up until 1980, the time between major disasters over $1 billion in cost was 82 days. By 2020, this figure had shrunk to 18 days, and the time between disasters is continuing to shrink every year. Climate experts, AccuWeather for Business, have estimated that this region is currently seeing 121 days above 100 degrees annually. This increases to 166 days by 2099. And these figures are conservative. This is not merely alarming. It means that we will have to adapt to extreme heat conditions, air conditioning loads will skyrocket, and agriculture and people will have to adapt. California agencies have estimated that to hit the state's clean energy goals, it will take 7 gigawatts of renewables, primarily solar and wind, to be installed annually for 25 years. This is 3 to 4 times more than we have installed in our best years so far. And land and transmission availability have begun to shrink noticeably. Given the trajectory of summertime temperatures, plus the added loads from the coming electrification of transportation and buildings, the concept the consortium is communicating is that the situation is urgent. We have to act now, and that we need all of the resources we can muster, including utility scale, residential, commercial, industrial, and community solar, to come even close to hitting the targets. Again, the notion is that all stakeholders need to draw together to tackle these formidable barriers. This webinar is put together to highlight the various initiatives that are proposed and to examine the implications of the recent PUC rulings on community solar. So without further delay, please welcome V. John White, Executive Director of the Center for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Technologies, who will be moderating today's webinar. Please take it away, John.
Thank you, Fred, and thanks to Dr. Loveridge for his many years of leadership and innovation in his academic career, but also in his work in the community and with UCR. The context in which Fred tells us where we are is really one that is quite extraordinary, and it's really a good news, bad news situation. The good news is that the costs of solar and batteries and wind and related clean energy technologies, including advanced geothermal, are falling, continuing to fall. And it is now the case that adding more clean energy increases affordability, reduces costs, and that's a significant change. The other thing that we're dealing with is a challenge of reliability. And we had an enormous heat storm the last 3 weeks, and the grid managed to skate through without any incidents, without any reductions in service. But this took an enormous amount of work and collective effort. One of the challenges we face is the costs are rising fastest at the distribution level, and that's where the source of increased rates is the greatest. And the discussion about cost shift and rates for non-participating customers, which is a highlight of the debate on community solar, has to take account of the value that's created for local reliability and local resilience by having local power generation both on individual rooftops and commercial spaces, but also in this new space of community solar that's sort of in between utility scale solar. The projects can be larger than simply rooftops, and then can the costs be shared across the broader community. And this also, with the proponents, imagine that they're enabling participation in clean energy by everybody, including renters and people living in multifamily housing. So the task that we have today is to understand the costs and the consequences of our current situation, as well as opportunities for reducing our vulnerability, increasing affordability, and strengthening our economy. So with that as a background, I'm looking forward to hearing from the panelists, and I'll turn it back to you, Fred.
First up today, we have Erica Bowman with us, Southern Cal Edison's VP of Strategy. We're very pleased to have Erica with us today for this session and dialogue around community solar. So please, Erica, very pleased to have you here. Take it away.
Thanks, Fred. Appreciate it. And appreciate you inviting me, and looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have in the next hour and a half. So just a few things, a few highlights. I think it was, I don't know exactly when, but I know you all hosted one of my colleagues to discuss our countdown to 2045 paper. And in that, we see a significant need for solar of all types, whether a lot for utility scale solar. We're seeing about 63 additional gigawatts needed to be put on the system from a CAISO wide perspective. I think right now we're a little over 20 gigawatts. We also see another 15 gigawatts of behind the meter, or could be community solar type projects that need to, again, be put on the system to help us manage all of the load that we see as we decarbonize our energy systems. So that's a really big amount of work ahead of us. We also have quite a need for battery storage. And I know, we mentioned it a little bit today in terms of we've been having this significant heat wave across the West, across the United States, really. And we have not had the same kind of emergency alerts that we've had in years past. A lot of that is due to the fact that we have put on a lot of battery storage to help with that reliability component. It helps take some of the overgeneration that you might see coming from solar had you not had the battery storage. It charges those batteries, and we're able to dispatch those batteries in the net peak period, so late afternoon, early evening. Really important. And as time moves forward, really that battery plus solar is key to enabling us to achieve our long-term goals. A little bit on the affordability front, rates have been rising. Over the past 5 years, we've seen, especially even at SCE, our rate increases outpaced inflation. And there were a couple of drivers for that. One, wildfire. Wildfire investment has been a big push on our side of things to make certain that we and our equipment are safe for the communities, that we're not igniting catastrophic wildfires, that we're protecting our communities. So that has been a big source, but that's only accounted for about 20% of that cost trajectory that has occurred over the past 5 years in rates. A bigger piece of it, about almost 30%, is really looking at what has occurred on the power supply side. So that's really generation. And really back in 2019, we were kind of doing our comparison from looking at today's rates versus 2019. One of the challenges there that we've obviously lived through and have responded to was the fact that we really had some challenges on our resource adequacy. We didn't have enough resources on the system. That's why in 2020, when we had those extreme heat events, it resulted in rotating outages. And, kudos to the state for responding to that, to the other IOUs, to other load serving entities, to really bringing those resources online. But that was something that, as we think about how we plan for the future, it could have been avoided had we had the right kind of, I would say, metrics in place to understand what actually was happening on the system. And one of those challenges was in the this gets a little bit wonky, but the effective load carrying capacity, so the ELCC values that you receive for resource adequacy, a lot of the renewables that may not, especially solar, they were getting some credits during the nighttime when we know that they're not able to generate during that time. And it was kind of masking some of the shortages during the net peak period. Now that's all been changed. The commission has reworked a lot of that. And it has also given more, I think, value towards storage in terms of relative across the different resource types. But those are things that as we plan into the future, we really need to think about, make certain that we're on target, because there might be new things that come up as we transition further away from fossil generation, of things we need to do to continue to update and change kind of our paradigms that we're operating in to incentivize the right pieces. And last thing I'll say before turning it back to Fred is on the affordability piece. One of the challenges, and I think Edison at times will come out, and I think solar folks involved in the solar industry will be like, why is Edison taking a position against, like in their view, which is against solar development, which is not the case. We absolutely want as much solar as we can get. We also want, as much storage as we can get at the right price. I think the challenge that we've seen over time, especially as it relates to the residential behind the meter storage, is there's just a really big cost shift between the adopters and the non-adopters. So today, when you look at an average bill, folks who haven't adopted solar because of just how the different policies have been set up historically, they're paying about $18 more a month relative to someone who has adopted solar. And so that's just one of our positions is we absolutely believe in incentives for solar development and other technologies. Sometimes you need those to get the market going, but we don't want it to come at the cost of other ratepayers. It needs to come from a different fund of money. From our perspective, it really, if the state wants to incentivize certain development, it really should be coming from the state and incentivizing that. And I think that goes with community solar. I think that's one of, just to be frank, that's been one of the challenges that we've seen, is that it still creates a cost shift. And if we're able to minimize that, and we see incentive funding, because there is real value to community solar, coming from the state level, different pots of money, or even the federal level, to get those projects off the ground. That's something that we're very much supportive of. So thank you for that. And I'll turn it back to Fred, looking for the conversation.
Okay, Erica, I wonder if you could expound a little bit more on your thoughts on how Southern Cal Edison can help roll out community solar.
Yeah, I think in some cases, it's one of the challenges for us is we have a lot of different things on our plate in terms of where our priorities lie. And one of the areas is we can certainly be supportive at the legislature in helping, or the governor's office in helping support, like, hey, we need incentives to get some of these community solar projects off the ground. It's not something that I know at the CPUC, especially in the recent community solar type activity, we proposed a whole different kind of structure, I think, relative to what others were proposing. And a lot of that was driven by a couple of things. One was the cost shift that we were seeing that would occur had it been the original structure. And then two, it was the fact that certain projects that were deemed as community solar almost felt like they could interconnect anywhere, but we wouldn't see them on the system, and the CAISO wouldn't see them on the system. And so we were concerned about what that would do for reliability. Because if we're not able to understand where those things are interconnecting and how that's going to impact the circuits, that can be real challenges for us just from an operational standpoint. So from our perspective, those were two things that were very important to us, to minimize the cost shift and also make certain that we understood where different projects were interconnecting so we could manage that on our system properly. So in those areas, like, we're more than happy to work with folks to figure out, kind of what different programs could be created to help with those things so that we can get more community solar deployed out there. But those were some of the challenges. I think, just though, to your question, we can certainly help on the advocacy side, but it does have to align with where we think from an operational perspective and affordability perspective where it needs to be.
So one of the things that I'm thinking is that we have a number of stakeholders here and people that, groups that are interested and so on. I wonder if we can sort of band together and go to the state and ask for, an incentive for community solar that would really allow the rollout. Just wondering what you think of that.
Yeah, I think that's an opportunity. Absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you very much for this, and I'm sure that we'll get more into the discussion as we progress today. Second up, we have Charles Loudon, Legislative Director for Assemblymember Chris Ward. Very pleased to have Charles with us. Assemblymember Ward has been leading some of these activities with respect to community solar. And so let's hear from Charles. Please go ahead.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm gonna try to share my screen. I have a few slides just to keep me on track. Let's see. All right, is everybody seeing that? Okay. Well, perfect. My name is Charles Loudon. I'm a legislative director for Assemblymember Chris Ward. He represents the 78th Assembly District, which encapsulates a lot of kind of more inland San Diego, and a little bit of El Cajon, starting kind of with the Balboa Park, going through Mission Valley, and then touching a little bit of El Cajon and going all the way up to Mira Mesa. And he's also the chair of the Housing Committee in the Assembly. One thing that has really pushed the Assembly members' interest in solar is it's kind of San Diego has really been a kind of one of the big kind of pioneers for especially rooftop solar. We have a very vocal community and kind of early adopters in our district. So the Assembly member has been kind of always been a huge proponent of solar and really wants to kind of push adoption where he can and make sure that we meet our goals that way. And another thing that has really pushed it is at the state level, we've been very aggressive and very kind of ambitious with our energy goals, and that is really to respond to the immense need that we need in our state. Fred did a great job of kind of outlining some of the effects that we've already seen with especially right now with the increased heat. It's been about 110 for two weeks up in Sacramento, which is pretty concerning and very scary for a lot of people, especially our unhoused population. So we want to make sure that while we're protecting people now, we want to make sure that we're doing what we can to mitigate those issues in the future. And as part of that, on the screen, I have kind of the renewables goal that we've set, the EV goals that we've set, and the Title 24 compliance goals. I think, but one thing that it comes with having goals like that is always going to be the pushback that we get at the state level. And a lot of the things we hear from opposition is that it's unsustainable, that we're not going to be able to meet these goals. And as we start seeing the rollout of these, we do start to see some of those voices get some traction. And one thing that we don't want is for those voices to push back against solar and start to see the decline because of what they see as unsustainable or push back against the goals because they see them as unrealistic. So we want to be able to do whatever we can to get closer to those goals, knowing that in reality we do need to be even more aggressive than we have been at the state level. And as part of that, we introduced back in 2022, we introduced AB 2316, which was our community solar bill that was really aimed at looking at all the community solar programs that we had in California, asking the CPUC to kind of catalog those, figure out which ones are working, which ones might not be working as much as we want to, and consolidate them. And as part of that as well was to create a new community solar program that really at its core had a couple different things in mind. First was to make sure that we're aiming the program at low-income subscribers, especially those that can't access solar currently. whether that be for financial reasons, be that they're renters, which is a huge portion of the state, or that their homes are simply in areas that can't accommodate solar. The other part was that we want to make sure that it's Title 24 compliant. We, as my boss is chair of the housing committee, he's very cognizant of our immense need to build as much housing as possible. As part of that, and as part of the Title 24 compliance, we have to have solar as part of each of those new constructions. So we want to make sure that there's also a cost-effective option for new construction, or in cases where rooftop solar is just not the best option. And the last part is we want to make sure that bill credits are created in a way that that makes it so that each of the products are economically feasible. One thing that we've seen in the past is if we don't structure those correctly, programs aren't scalable, and we don't see as much adoption as we want or the state needs. So I mentioned a little bit the potential for community solar really is that there's a huge portion of California that can't access rooftop solar. And we want to make sure that everyone has access to renewable energy. And we see community solar as really a great option for a huge portion of the state to be able to access that. The last part that I haven't really touched on is grid reliability. When you're able to do solar plus storage, I know Erica talked a lot about that, and it's really important for our state because we want to make sure that in times of kind of extreme heat, or when people are really using a lot more energy, whether that be with EVs or other electric devices, that the state's ready for those peak hours. And part of that is, like I said, we don't want the opposition to start kind of gaining traction and moving back towards fossil fuels, which do have a pretty detrimental effect on our environment. So the future of community solar at the state level, one thing that I'm sure a lot of you know is the PUC took a decision this year that we're a bit concerned about at the legislative level. We just want to make sure that whatever program gets created out of 2316 is economically feasible, so that we get as much solar in the ground as possible. We've seen it programs like this very successful in other states to get rapid adoption, and so while we're happy to keep working with the CPUC, we want to make sure that whatever program gets created is effective and kind of meets the goals that we need as a state. Perfect, and that's the rest of my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, this is interesting as we progress here. I'm hoping, John, that you can offer thoughts as we go and be part of each of these presentations.
I wanted to go back to a question that was raised by Southern California Edison about the lack of visibility of community solar systems to the grid operator or to the utility. It would seem to me that's something that could be remedied. I'm just wondering if the proponents of community solar see that as something that should be considered, because I think it would help with the value proposition.
Yeah, so I think that was specific to the MVBT proposal at the commission in the original form. And I think part of the challenge, and this goes to some of the broader issues that we need to resolve as a state, is the interconnection queue is so big right now, especially at the transmission level. And depending on the size of the project, you may need to be interconnecting at a at least on our system, we have sub-transmission, so a higher voltage, not quite distribution, but we consider as part of our transmission, but it's lower than kind of your typical interstate, kind of intrastate transmission lines. The queue is just really big. And it's something that the CAISO is working through in terms of how do they adjust their rules and framework to get the most kind of viable projects through more quickly. So I think part of the challenge that was happening in the conversation with the MVBT program at the commission recently was the developers were seeing that queue and saying, well, I don't know how to get through that. I need to bypass it and be able to interconnect at a different point. But that creates challenges on our end. So it might be more of a short-term issue because of those challenges that we see at the CAISO.
Also, I wanted to ask about the billing credit and the calculations, and is there any way to make that process transparent and subject to broad input? Because I can see that being both crucial to the success of the economics, but also to the value proposition.
And when you say the billing credits, like in terms of transparency, sorry, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, how they're calculated and how you determine and allocate those benefits and costs.
Yeah, so at least on I'm not the expert on exactly the calculations. They are transparent and they will be laid out, or if they haven't already be laid out in a tariff. So we are very clear about how those things are calculated and put on a bill or available to a bill. So those are defined and will be defined. I don't know what the time frame is as it relates to the passage of the approval of the MVBT, the net value billing tariff, and how those are currently being calculated. But there will be a tariff, and it is transparent in how those get distributed across customers.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Matt Freedman, staff attorney, focused on electricity at the Utility Reform Network, that's TURN. Please take it away, Matt.
Great, thank you very much. Great to be here today. Can folks see my slides? Are those showing up? Great. So my name is Matt Freedman. I am a staff attorney with the Utility Reform Network, or TURN. TURN is a nonprofit consumer advocacy organization. We've been operating in California for over 50 years, representing the interests of residential customers of the utilities across the state. And we're very active in front of the Public Utilities Commission, in front of other state agencies and the legislature. And we've been engaging in this conversation about community solar in all of these forums. And I want to share with you a bunch of slides to give you a sense of where we are in terms of the conversation with a little bit more detail than we've heard so far. So first of all, I want to talk about behind the meter solar and net metering. And you might say, why? We're not talking about that today, but I think it's very, very directly related to the conversation about community solar. This is a graph that shows the basically penetration of rooftop solar here in California by year. And the primary method of consumer participation in clean energy has been through net energy metering. And we've seen since 2021 almost a 50% increase in the amount of solar capacity located behind the meter. This is an incredible explosion in adoption given the history of this program. It also correlates this period with the time of unprecedented rate increases by the three big investor-owned utilities. And of course, these two trends are related. The higher rates get and the more lucrative net metering becomes, the more adoption we're going to see. I think it's important to note that 2023 was the biggest year ever for rooftop deployment. Over 2,200 megawatts were added. And the 2024 data that looks like a little bit of a blue nub on the 2024 bar, that's just because they have partial year data. This is only through April 30th of this year, so we'll still see how the rest of the year shakes out. When we look at who's installing solar, because that first graph showed all customer classes, it turns out, unsurprisingly, that residential customers installed almost 3/4 of the behind the meter solar to date. Now, residential customers only account for about 1/3 of total electricity sales on the utility system. So there's a mismatch here, and part of it has to do with the rate structure and the benefits associated with installing for a residential customer. As of January of 2024, approximately 16% of all investor-owned utility residential customers were on net metering. The highest among the 3 utilities is San Diego Gas and Electric with 22%. The lowest is Southern California Edison at just over 13%. So what's the problem? Isn't this just great news, and shouldn't we all be celebrating? Well, yes and no. Look, the net metering program has been the dominant form of direct customer participation in clean energy development, but it has an impact on rates. Why? Because net metering reduces the retail sales that a utility has, and that lower retail sales means lower revenue collections from the residential class. But the problem is that net metering really doesn't offset a significant amount of utility spending. When utilities are spending money on wildfire mitigation or public purpose programs, a whole array of initiatives, grid hardening, none of those costs are affected by a customer's decision to install solar. And so as a result, the costs not paid by a net metering customer are reallocated to all rates. And that's been one of the primary drivers of rate increases, not the primary, but among the primary drivers in recent years. As a result, the cost shift associated with the net metering program has really increased substantially. It's doubled since 2021. In 2021, the estimate by the Public Advocate's Office was it was $3.4 billion a year. And for 2024, their estimate is $6.5 billion a year. That's every year the cost shift. And the calculation that's been done for utility bills is about 15% of the average household bill is used to subsidize net metering. And this subsidy is expected to increase in the future due to both increases in overall rates and subsidies that continue to be embedded into the net billing tariff program, which is the replacement net metering program the Commission adopted in late 2022. So we need another strategy going forward as we want to scale consumer participation in the solar market and in participation in renewable energy generally, that aligns the costs with the value and serves all customers and not just homeowners that have the ability to put solar panels on their roof. So with that, the opportunity of community solar. So there was a big conversation at the Public Utilities Commission around community solar as part of the net energy metering reform proceeding, but the PUC expressed very little interest in dealing with that topic at the time. And they basically kicked the can down the road and said, please come back at another time. And so groups like TURN and the Coalition for Community Solar Access and other solar industry and environmental groups went to the legislature and said, now's the time to do a bill. And thankfully, Assemblymember Ward took on that challenge and authored AB 2316. TURN was proud to support that bill and to work on it with our partners in the solar industry and environmental justice groups. And we recognize that this is an opportunity to use community solar programs to increase customer access and particularly to hit hard to reach populations. And why do we like this idea better than net metering? Well, larger systems under community solar mean lower cost. It's just much more cost effective to do especially ground mount systems than to put small boutique systems on everybody's roof. Also, we want to pair these with energy storage. Energy storage has huge value. We've heard it from every speaker today. So why not have it be a design feature in a community solar program that all of these projects have to include lots of storage, which provides value to the grid. We can also use optimized locations for community solar. We don't tell people where they can put solar on their rooftop, and so it kind of shows up chaotically across the system, but we can be much more intentional with how we do community solar deployments. We can also de-link compensation for generation from retail rates, which, as I mentioned, retail rates have a lot of costs in them that have nothing to do with the value of generation. So we can come up with a new structure for it. We can also set up a structure where the subscriber, the customer who subscribes to a project, they pay their whole bill for their total usage, and then the credits come afterwards. That's the structure we're talking about. This approach can minimize the rate impacts for non-participants. And in particular, we can take advantage of big federal tax credits and federal money that have been authorized in the last few years. So who are we trying to hit? How about renters? Renters are 45% of California residents. They're about 2/3 of low-income residents of the state. And they're pretty much frozen out of the net metering behind the meter solar market. Why? Because if you don't own your home, you can't put a solar system on it. It's pretty much that simple. Also, many commercial customers, small commercial customers, they lease their space. They don't have access to their own rooftops. Multifamily dwellings, especially apartment buildings, they can do virtual net energy metering, but participation has been quite limited. Another thing about community solar is subscriptions are portable. If you move and you are a community solar customer, you take your subscription with you. That's not the case if you have solar on a rooftop of the dwelling that you're living in. And finally, alternative compliance under Title 24. As many people know, the state is requiring all new residential construction to have solar on top of the dwelling. Well, we can come up with an alternative way to satisfy that requirement. In fact, it's in the regulations that participation in a community solar program serves as alternative compliance, and it can be a much cheaper way to get there. How much cheaper? We did a little calculation here. What is the cost of achieving 1,000 megawatts of solar and storage, either behind the meter using net billing tariff, which is essentially net metering revised, through the net value billing tariff, which Turn worked on with CCSA and other groups, and through PURPA, which is the proposal that is favored by Edison and PG&E. And basically what it shows is that this is total compensation under each program. The net billing tariff is over $20 billion to get you 1,000 megawatts of solar and storage. If you do it through the net value billing tariff, which we've endorsed, you're coming a little bit under $14 billion. And these are 20-year values, by the way. And if you use PURPA, which is the federal avoided cost structure, it's about $5.5 billion. Well, that would seem to suggest, let's do it through PURPA. It's so much cheaper than any other alternative, which is what Edison and PG&E proposed. But this value isn't real. Why? Because that value doesn't actually get you new projects. Developers aren't willing to sign those contracts at scale, and we're not seeing any uptake under those existing programs. And the Building Association, the California Building Industry Association, has estimated that the demand for new solar under Title 24 is between 250 and 400 megawatts a year. So these values that you're looking here, this is between 2.5 and 4 years worth of need under the building program. And this is the kind of money that could be saved if we had a viable community solar program that had uptake. So what happened at the legislature and at the PUC? Well, as Charles mentioned, Assemblymember Ward put together a bill that had broad support, and everybody working on this bill, including the legislators, the staff, the governor's office, everybody understood that this was designed to use the avoided cost calculator to provide subscriber compensation. But when we got to the PUC decided to take a different view, even though they had a long proceeding, many rounds of testimony, briefing, more comments. The PUC basically rejected the use of the avoided cost calculator based on pretty specious reasoning. It felt like a very outcome-oriented decision to many of us working on it, kind of a head scratcher, and it really demonstrated a keen disinterest from the commission in adopting a meaningful community solar program that could serve more than a small number of customers. I mean, we're trying to get a program that can develop thousands of megawatts. The PUC is more interested in a program that would do hundreds of megawatts. Big difference. Doesn't really move the needle on achieving our climate goals or meeting any of our other objections. And in fact, the PUC decision originally said that AB 2316, the program envisioned by that bill, would violate federal law, which everybody could not understand how they would conclude. It actually led to a scurry of activity around the country as governors from other states called into Governor Newsom saying, what are you doing? Because are you saying that my community solar program in my state is illegal under federal law? Well, the PUC finally decided to remove that piece of the decision. But I will note that the PUC doesn't typically have decisions that include written dissents. This had a written dissent by one of the commissioners, Commissioner Houck, who expressed serious concerns about the reasoning that was used. But basically, the decision makes minor changes to the existing green tariff programs, rejects the net value billing tariff, and adopts a community renewable energy program that limits generator compensation to what's available under the REMAT program and the PURPA programs, and it requires all of subscriber benefits to be funded through external sources of money. Okay, what do we have in terms of external sources of money? Let's take a quick look. First of all, the use of existing programs, REMAT and PURPA, this means the program as designed would be doomed to fail. Why? Because there's no uptake under these programs. If you look at the REMAP program, the prices are based on solar-only projects that have been contracted under 20 megawatts in size. But community solar projects aren't going to be 20 megawatts. They're going to be 5 megawatts. Why? The tax credits are limited to 5 megawatts. The federal funding that the state has received is only available for projects up to 5 megawatts in size. So smaller projects having to live with prices that are competitively bid by bigger projects is kind of a mismatch. And the bigger projects that are being used as the benchmark don't have storage. And we're trying to get projects that have storage. Meanwhile, PURPA, the Federal Avoided Cost Program, this has a price that really hasn't been very attractive to developers. In fact, the last project that was successfully developed under this program, new project, was built in the 1990s. That tells you how effective this program has been at getting new capacity online. And relying on external funding, we don't have a sustainable source of external money. I am all in favor of the legislature and the state of California kicking in money that's provided by taxpayers and other broad-based collection mechanisms. But the state's broke right now, and the amount of money that has been allocated is paltry. It's not going to get us more than a small number of megawatts, at most a couple hundred. We really would need to increase that by 5 or 10 times. And then finally, what could we do to make this program work? Well, we need to adjust the compensation that a community solar generator would get to reflect the benefits that they provide. And it's got to reflect the value of energy storage, which is expensive, but it's worth it. It provides a lot of value to the system. So how are we going to do that? That's an open question. Let's find locations where these projects can be installed that have minimal interconnection costs. We heard concerns about the transmission queue problem. Well, this might be a shortcut to getting new generation interconnected at distribution, but it's not going to happen unless the program is designed to make it work. We could use a reverse auction to select projects rather than an administrative price. We could try to set pricing based on what the utilities are paying under their larger scale programs where they do procurement for renewables with storage. And we could use external funds to potentially buy down the entire cost of a storage system. So we need a lot more money to make this program work under the construction that the PUC has adopted. And then finally, we're really interested in seeing opportunities to have communities partner with developers to build these projects. This is something that Turn put forward, municipalities that could provide land and other resources for the development of new community solar installations, could take ownership of those and could help with financing, could use those sites to provide resiliency centers for local residents, EV charging. There's a lot of creative ways to think about it, but if the numbers don't work and these projects simply aren't going to pencil out, you're not going to see any successful development. And unfortunately, that's kind of what the utilities have wanted the commission to do. They're looking for a small program that really has limited participation. And we just see things differently. We think there's a huge opportunity and we hope the state doesn't squander it. So thanks. That's what I've got to present for right now.
Thank you, Matt. That's a terrific presentation and covers a lot of ground. And I'm sure there'll be questions and comments, but thank you for giving us a very good foundation for this conversation.
Okay, next up we have Derek Chernow from who is Western Regional Director for the Coalition for Community Solar Access. Really looking forward to what Derek has to say. And as we transition through these presentations, more and more questions are raised. So Derek, please go ahead.
Great, thank you, Fred. Appreciate it, and thank you for having me here today. The Coalition for Community Solar Access is the trade association for over 125 companies, nonprofit organizations, and others working in the community solar space around the country. So we kind of have a unique perspective and view of community solar and its growth throughout the United States and its lack of growth in California. And I just want to take a quick second here to recognize Charles Loudon and his boss, Assemblymember Chris Ward. Recently, the Coalition for Community Solar Access recognized 2024 Community Solar Champions throughout the country, and Assemblymember Ward was one of our community solar champions out west. So Charles works a few blocks away, but I don't get to see him as often as I'd like. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to recognize Assemblymember Ward and the great staff work that Charles does on behalf of community solar. And as Matt and Charles pointed out in their presentations, talked about where we are in the battle over community solar. It really is a battle. Community solar has been around in California for 10 years, and we've done practically nothing with it. There's been no storage. Low-income participation has been minimal. It hasn't been scalable or sustainable in program design, despite some repeated attempts to better those programs here in California. And so with AB 2316, a broad coalition, including CCSA, TURN, environmental justice groups, the Building Industry Association, and others came together and really thought through what a sustainable, scalable program would look like. We came out with the net value billing tariff, which would have really kind of created the type of program that would have enabled all the potential for community solar and storage to really flourish. The PUC did not adopt that and kind of really boxed in where we can go from here in their decision. So what we're left with now, as Matt pointed out, is a program that needs to be designed within very, very tight parameters. And that's kind of what we're left with, is trying to figure out how can we come up with a program that is going to be almost completely reliant on one-time funding from the federal government, those Solar for All dollars, which is exactly what the federal government did not want those dollars to be spent on. The Solar for All dollars were meant to be spent on transformative, accelerating programs throughout the country to really see an uptake in community solar, particularly with low-income households. We're not going to see that here in California. It's going to be a one-time funding, get some projects up and running, and then we're going to have to come back and really come up with a long-term fix. This does not address cost shift whatsoever. And we're in a really tight bind on how to get some projects up and running and get those benefits into households that really need to see those savings the most. And so that's kind of the lay of the land here in California. And I think a telling figure, a couple telling figures, the National Community Solar Partnership at the Department of Energy, they wanted to see 20 gigawatts. Their goal was to see 20 gigawatts of community solar by 2025. That's enough energy to power 5 million households and create $1 billion in energy savings for subscribers. Wood Mackenzie, the industry consultancy, came out with a report before the decision by the PUC that showed California could really provide 19% of the growth in community solar over the next 5 years around the country. After the proposed decision came out in March, which was pretty much approved in late May, that figure dipped down to 2%, and that's abysmal. And really what it's saying is that the nation cannot meet its goals without California, and California can't get there with the kind of decisions that that the PUC is adopting here. And so what we're really left with now is, again, this broad coalition, which now includes Democrats and Republicans, farmers and farm workers, an unparalleled coalition of entities coming together and trying to develop a program, at least in the short term, that's going to get some projects up and running and get these benefits out to the communities that need it the most, get the reliability and resiliency benefits. And ultimately, one of the things that we haven't talked about, as we're talking about cost shift, is what is the state spending money on? We're spending billions of dollars to keep peaker plants in operation, fossil fueled peaker plants, often in low-income communities in operation. Well, if we have enough community solar and storage here in California, we can take those peaker plants offline and really provide clean energy to the communities that need it the most, get those projects operational, get people working, and provide all those benefits that community solar and storage really has here in California. And as Matt has mentioned in his presentation, storage is absolutely key to this. In their decision, the PUC basically said storage is optional. It's not optional in California. We can't have more solar without storage, added to that. But storage is a significant cost of each project. So as we look forward to developing a program, even if it's a short-term program, as we run through these very, very limited Solar for All dollars, we've got to develop some kind of compensation structure that makes sense to not only build the projects, but include storage with that, so we can meet those peak demands. As was talked about earlier, We've been going through heat waves here, not just in Sacramento, but up and down the state. And, recently they've talked about how batteries have absolutely made the difference. We can't turn back that clock and keep putting on solar without batteries. So community solar really has an opportunity to live up to that potential and continue providing all those benefits at the distribution level. And our developers are accustomed to going in there and making those upgrades at the distribution level, bearing those costs as they're building out their projects, so we can avoid a lot of the transmission and distribution costs associated with projects here up and down the state. So I think we are very I don't know what the proper term here is, but we are still cautiously optimistic that we can come up with something that we can see hundreds of megawatts within this current parameters here at the PUC. But as we've pointed out here from previous speakers, we're going to need a lot more than that. And the net value billing tariff that CCSA, Turn, and others worked so diligently on, at a minimum, that would have put 8 gigawatts of distributed community solar and storage on the grid. Without that net value billing tariff, we're looking at a much smaller program. But I think it's important that we get these projects up and running. We show that indeed community solar and storage, as we envision it, really provides the types of benefits that we continue to talk about. Continues to provide those types of benefits from projects that are ground mount on landfills, rooftops, brownfields. So we are continuing to work as hard as we can, push the envelopes where we can, and come up with a program that the PUC will approve in the short term as we continue to think about and work on some longer term fixes here. But it is absolutely important and imperative that California, as a state, regain that leadership mantle in community solar. We've lost it, and it's not a typical position for California to be in. We have been a leader on so many wonderful issues, including Title 24 and those building standards, and we've absolutely given up the leadership mantle when it comes to community solar. We've seen New York, Massachusetts, Colorado, others around the state continue to push and see the benefits of it. We haven't done that here in California. Recently, Alaska approved a community solar legislation. Alaska. We're still here talking about implementing AB 2316 2 years after it was passed. We can't afford to dither any longer here in California. We need to move forward. We need to move forward aggressively. We need to bring on those projects online. And as California, the 5th largest economy in the world, continues to add those data centers, AI related jobs, as California continues to electrify everything from vehicles to buildings to you name it, where is that energy going to come from? It's going to take all the above approach, and community solar and storage absolutely has to be part of that all the above approach. Right now, we're not there, but we're working diligently with Turn, with companies, with other nonprofit organizations up and down the state to try to bring this into reality, and that's kind of where we're at. So looking forward to answering additional questions, but thank you again for having me here.
Thank you, Derek. I want to just make an observation about the nature of policy making and decision making at the PUC. One of the things that I've observed after many years of working there is that they have a tendency to subdivide everything into these individual proceedings and not see the big picture or the links between the proceedings. So, for example, they respond to the cost shifts on rooftop solar and existing net metering by cutting it back and having an adverse effect on the industry because there's no alternative. SMUD, on the other hand, in Sacramento, reduced the net metering benefits, but expanded tax incentives, rebates for batteries, and committed to pay people for behind the meter solar when the sun goes down, right? I mean, that's the link here, and Matt's entirely correct. When they did the net metering decision, there was no thought about what should come next, or what the ongoing cost shift issues are. And I think this is something that we have to look at more holistically than we have been able to do up to now. But I think it's going to require the commission to get out of its own way and think about how to make change. It's not that we don't want to see change in these programs or that we don't want to protect non-participating customers. But as was mentioned, we're running up a pretty big tab in terms of the costs we're paying to keep running the fossil fuel plants, and the demand forecast and the load growth is going to drive that even harsh. So I think we have a lot of work to do. This conversation has been helpful to me in understanding the dynamics, but I think we're stuck because we need a bigger picture view than what we're getting.
John, how do you think we can approach the PUC on this? What sort of measures can we take to?
Well, I don't know. I would maybe think about a way to package Matt's slides and present them as a view that I don't know that everybody on this webinar would agree with, but I think Matt's slides lay out the issues and the linkages in a way that hasn't been done before. And to me, it's this micro versus big picture that we've got to try to get them to see.
Good comment. Thank you very much for that. Next up, we have Jaquelyn Fairbairn, VP of Luminia, a solar developer. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing what Jaquelyn has to say. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Fred, thank you so much for having me. And to all the other panelists, thank you so much. Matt, you definitely had the best slides. And I think you did a great job laying out what we had. And it's so important to get everybody's perspective here. Erica, to start, Matt and Charles and Derek, there's been just so much effort, not just with industry associations, but across the board in California to really try to find a community solar program that can work. And I just want to thank everybody for the participation today. And it's always great to come out at the end because I can just comment on some amazing points that everybody has made. Just really quickly, I just want to talk about what Luminia does, who we are, where we're from. Luminia was formed in 2019. We're a San Diego-based C&I community solar developer. We were born from renewable finance company that paired with commercial real estate developers who were focused not only on really just trying to avoid naked rooftops that you see as you fly into California, but also to try to increase the adoption of what you're seeing. I think one of the slides, you see a lot of net metering coming in from residential, but that I believe 75% of all the net metering, it's very challenging to get solar on rooftops for C&I for a myriad of reasons. But we've been working to try to solve that in California. We work both behind the meter and front of the meter, and we were really looking forward to a strong community solar program in California. We also work in New England with community solar as well. And one thing I just wanted to say is that we really have, we do feel that community solar, of all the ways to install or develop solar, is one of the most challenging ways because there are so many different stakeholders. You have ratepayers, you have subscribers, you have developers, you have landowners, you have interconnection queues, you have CPUC, you have CAISO, and you have the utilities. And all of those people have to come together to come up with a good program. And it's not easy. And a lot of them are boom and bust, which makes it very hard for developers. But there are good programs that have brought significant scale. One of those is New York. One thing to talk about with New York is that they were able to get 2 gigawatts of community solar in a very short period of time. Illinois has another great program to look at, and one that's a little bit more niche, but holds a little piece of my heart because they're very focused on the built environment would be New Jersey. So well over 20 states have great community solar programs. It's possible, it's doable. And we're so looking forward to trying to get something. And I really feel strongly that with all of the people on this call today and everybody who's trying to work, that we can come up with something that works. And I think when you look at the size and scale of New York at 2 gigawatts and knowing that it can be done, looking at the current proposed decision, and I think Erica brought up a point that, 15 gigawatts of behind the meter solar is needed still. I don't think this program is going to hit the mark with what's needed. We talked a lot about the CREP program, the Community Renewable Energy Program that was brought out, and how that's based on PURPA, and how that program, well, I think it's about 500 megawatts that are put on there. It's going to be very hard for developers to make any money unless we can find a good way for additional funds to come in and make it so that we can actually develop projects and pay for labor and pay for the product and make sure that we can get it done. In addition, I do want to talk a little bit about some good things that were done to the existing DAC program. One thing that was wonderful is that the geographic zone was very restrictive for the DAC program that they left standing. Before, you had to be located in a disadvantaged community. And that's a census tract and a location and a map, and it's very restricting. Just to give a good example, in San Diego, we identified roughly 750 rooftops that could be viable for a community solar program. In the previous restrictive program, there were about 62 rooftops that were viable, just because it was so restrictive. Now the new program allows within five miles of a disadvantaged community. And that's going to make it great. The problem is that program doesn't really address the rate shift issue overall in a programmatic approach, but also it's capped to 144 megawatts statewide. So that's broken into about 12 program administrators, CCAs, and IOUs, who are all going to be doing their own RFP processes, where you don't know when they're going to be put in. And you have to have projects developed up to that point. So it makes it just really challenging as a developer to understand different timings, different resources, get projects up to bat, and then it's a competitive process and it's a black box. So you're not sure what's going to come up and what's not. So you're spending resources on projects that may never get built because there may never be any capacity there. So there's a real great opportunity to bring projects in the built environment, but it's putting a lot of additional competition on developers and having us spend additional money, where we would love to just develop as much as possible, but one, it's restrictive, and two, it's in a black box. And that's one thing that the net value billing tariff was going to help us with, because we had great visibility on what we were going to make. We could then focus on areas where interconnection costs were going to be smaller, and we can maximize our tax credit to really reduce all the costs. But now with the current process, it's really challenging, at least within that DAC process. And the PURPA process, unfortunately, just we don't know where it's going to come out. Matt had a number that maybe with the rate shift, with covering the 20% bill cost, that there maybe be enough money from Solar for All and the $33 million from the CPUC to get maybe 100 megawatts. So I think that's something that people should look at, because I think our numbers internally came very close. We were looking at maybe 70 to 90, because I think one thing that people aren't taking into account is, once again, with all these stakeholders, developers have to build the project with that PURPA amount, as well as the money to the subscribers need to go to that. So it's just splitting a very thin number across a bunch of people. And I think we're not going to be able to get the scale that we need with that. So I just wanted to explain the way that I look at this proceeding and how we could move forward. We would love to work under any program if we can make it work, because we see the value in California. And with the size of the need, what Charles brought it up, we've got some really hefty goals, and we really do need to do an all of the above approach. Utility scale is going to do a few things. And I also feel like we need community solar as well as net metering. The second thing I just wanted to touch on, and I think everybody touched on it, was storage. Storage is so incredibly important for our grid. Everybody spoke about it. I think we're in a position right now where the grid's operating so well because we were able to get 10 gigawatts on, but we're still going to need a lot more. And the way that the current proposed decision is written is that you can bring storage into the DAC-GT program, but it's optional. So within those 12 program administrators, it's going to be really hard for us to understand. And siting for storage and solar is going to be slightly different. So if we don't have visibility into that, it's very hard to include storage. And I think everybody agrees that we need to incentivize storage as much as possible. So that's just one thing from a developer perspective. We would love to include storage as much as possible, but it's very challenging if we don't understand how we're going to get compensated. And I think California is really leading the charge with storage, with a couple other states right now. And this is a huge opportunity that we have. And then I think the last thing that I just want to touch on here is timing and how important it is from a developer. The legislation that Chris Ward brought out, which was incredible and so proud of. I'm actually a constituent. I live in North Park, so that map right there, I'm right by Balboa Park. So we're really grateful to see all of this work going on, and to get this implemented, and we're 2 years down the road, is very hard for people who are trying to get projects in. It affects current programs. It affects the landowners who are willing to provide money and then are getting excited when they feel like they're going to get additional income that may help them retire sooner, or it may help them, improve another part of their property, right? And so we really need to get some program clarity as quickly as possible, at least for a short-term program that can work with certain places, and hopefully something that can just be a little bit larger. I did want to touch on interconnection. I do think that Erica brought a great point up. The queues are huge. This is hard for everybody. I think there's some great reform that's going on. I do think that there's a really big difference between distribution scale projects and transmission scale projects. And I do think that there's not a good way to through the processes that we have right now to clearly bring distributed projects on as quickly as they can. They may get stuck in transmission queues in order to be able to have that visibility that we need, but that's to the detriment of these distributed projects that can come online faster. And when we have such a big goal, having that as an additional delay is a huge problem that doesn't just affect community solar, but just California as a whole. And I just don't think we're set up for it yet. And I think it has to do with how quickly the queues grew as well. But I would just welcome the ability to try to work with everybody in California to try to find a way to do that. I think the Derek and CCSA made a great suggestion to use Rule 21 so that projects can move a little bit more quickly. I do think that there would be a lot of work that would have to be done, but if there's something that would allow distribution projects to provide the visibility as well as move in the way that wouldn't delay distributed projects, I think that would be a huge win for California. And lastly, I just think that we've got huge goals. I think Charles brought it up. And if we can continue to work together like we are right now to just bring policy in try to implement it properly, I know that we can get an amazing program growing. So thanks for everybody who's working on it, and thanks for the time, Fred.
Thank you. I think we've got a good base of knowledge in front of us. Now the question is, what do we want to do with it? Fred, are we ready for questions?
Yes, we are. And I believe that Ed has a question that he'd like to ask.
So Ed Smeloff is going to be our moderator for the question. Just to introduce him, he's a member of the board of CERT, and he's a consultant to Grid Lab, which is a think tank and esteemed group of grid experts.
Thank you, John. Thanks, Fred. I'd like to ask a question of Derek and Erica. And Southern California Edison has been a real leader in reforming the resource adequacy program in California, which is really essential to keeping the lights on, and has been a driver of, along with the procurement of the batteries that have been placed on in the last couple of years. So as we move to the new reform slice of day, there's a really strong value stream in the resource adequacy program, which can drive batteries paired with solar. So is there an opportunity as we reform the resource adequacy program to drive more community solar projects that will get credit and paid for the resource adequacy that they provide? And I'm thinking also of, as we see load growth, and load growth will occur in certain pockets where we see, the vehicle charging stations and AI and so on. And you look at you fly into Ontario Airport and you see such a huge amount of available warehouse space. Each of these warehouses could accommodate 5 megawatts or more. Is there really an opportunity now to better plan and drive community solar by properly crediting the resource adequacy and maybe going beyond the resiliency, local resiliency, so that you can fund in a way that links the benefits together with the cost to drive more community solar? So maybe start with Erica, and I'd like to also have the question go to Derek.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate the question. It's a good question, and I think really it would really have to be like kind of how the program's organized. But I think there could be certainly opportunities where if CAISO could have visibility into those assets, especially on the like how that would happen, and it might need to be come through the IOU or the load serving entity, depending on kind of how it's structured. But I could see how, depending on the size of those assets and how they're contributing to the system and its reliability, that they could see resource adequacy payments. I think some of the challenges is just, how much visibility does the CAISO operator get across the system? Because they're really operating at the transmission level. Relative to obviously where the IOUs are the distribution system operator. And it's really kind of that at that point, like, how do you kind of share those credits from the larger market perspective into the distribution system? But certainly a conversation to be had.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, with our proposed net value billing tariff, we had built that around the avoided cost calculator as determined by Assembly Bill 2316 and made very clear by Assemblymember Ward. And that would have taken in, a transmission and distribution values at that distribution level. And without that ability, with the recent decision by the PUC now saying we can't use their own avoided cost calculator, I think you're absolutely right, Ed, is that we need to find a way to compensate based on that. And with resource adequacy values continuing to rise, it becomes even more important and more critical for these community solar and storage projects to come online.
Yeah.
So Derek, in part of the interconnection reform process that's going on at the ISO, the load-serving entities will get to vote or nominate projects that they want to see be in the study process, higher up in the queue. So this may be the opportunity for community solar developers to work together with LSEs to make sure that those projects get through the reform process, get higher up and are recognized for the values that they're providing the LSE. So that's one way to kind of coordinate the resource adequacy.
Ed, could I jump in just to chat a little bit about what I'm seeing on the resource adequacy timing as it relates to distribution projects? There is one way annually that you can get deliverability if you're tied to the distribution grid called DGD. It's just very small scale, and there's not a lot available. Otherwise, it's my understanding, working with CAISO, that all distributed projects would still have to go through the interconnection queues, which would mean that any new project wouldn't be able to get in until 2026 into that queue, and then wouldn't be able to get resource adequacy until 2028. And then so with that, there's also issues with the fact that, there's constraints around available deliverability as well. And with that doesn't increase until transmission projects are getting completed. And those transmission projects are taking up to 10 years in certain places. I think the average is 8 to 10. Please correct me if I'm wrong there. But when it comes to needing to get these in and being able to have a viable program, we would have to be able to find something where we could speed up that timeline.
You are correct about the time it takes to plan and permit and develop the transmission. And there does need to be some form of deliverability so that there's some interim deliverability status for these projects while the larger system is being built out. And so I think it's a very clear comment that you have, and it needs to be brought to the CAISO's attention that interim deliverability is going to be vital for these projects to move forward. John, I see there's a question. There are a couple questions on the Q&A, and one of them sort of relates to this idea about fairness, so that the non-participating or historically non-participating customers could participate in a program that it would be inclusive of renters and others. And I'm assuming that is, but maybe I'm wrong, that is a sort of a non-controversial element of the reform, to have to allow people to have portability and to be able to sign on and participate in community solar projects. Maybe I could ask that question of SCE.
Yeah, we support that, absolutely. That folks who are unable to participate in today's net billing tariff type programs or previous NEM programs, that they have the ability to participate in other type of programs like community solar.
Maybe I could ask a question of Matt. So looking for new sources of funds, one of the funding sources that was put forward back in 2022 in AB, it was the Ting Bill 215, was the Distributed Energy Backup Assets Program that would be funded through general fund revenues or non-utility revenues. And looks like that program is also being cut back on, when it was assumed that program would be needed as sort of a strategic reserve. Do you see opportunities through the CEC or through the DEBA program for funding for community solar?
I think all sources of funding out external to rates would, are on the board. The problem, as many folks know who are active in Sacramento, is that there's no money in the budget this year. Programs were getting cut. The California budgeting process is like a roller coaster. One year, there's an incredible amount of surplus and there's money for everything. And the next year, we're in hardcore scarcity mode and they're cutting back and actually clawing back previously authorized funding. This is a terrible way to support these types of programs. So we're kind of stuck right now in these one-time infusions of funding. But a one-time infusion isn't going to be enough. If we want this to be more than a boutique program that serves a small number of customers, and the decision has been made to rely heavily on sources of funding outside of rates, we need to have a sustainable funding commitment from those external sources. So in response to your question, Ed, sure, repurposing some of the money that's already been approved for DWR to subsidize gas plants would be great, but it's not going to be enough if it's a one-time commitment. And so I think that the path forward is to really look at cap and trade funding and the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, and to have there be sustained commitments for the use of that money to support community solar development. That's if the program is going to work at all. Right now, the PUC is kind of stuck with a program it adopted and cobbled together kind of at the last minute that is pretty incoherent. In fact, it's so incoherent that people don't even agree what they adopted. And now there's a second phase of the proceeding where parties are trying to salvage something, including, hey, maybe you need to change what you just adopted because it doesn't really make any sense. So what's the core structure of the program going to look like? What's the money going to be used for? We've been arguing for the money to be used, external funding, to provide upfront cost reduction for solar and storage projects. But others have said, well, let's just use it for bill credits, meaning there's a pot of money and people who subscribe get the money as a bill credit. And when the money runs out, oh well. That's not a good strategy, the oh well strategy. So we need to think about a better way to deploy that money to get maximum value up front. There's a lot of issues here. And unfortunately, I'm not optimistic, only because the PUC seems really disinterested in developing a program that can scale and go big. And that's the fundamental hurdle that we're facing today.
John, do you have thoughts on how we might be able to approach that issue?
I don't really. I think one thing that I would observe is that the availability of distributed solar in areas other than pure rooftop, as was mentioned, landfills or commercial warehouses and things. This is a relatively unexplored source of solar, and it's sort of in between utility scale and rooftop. And I think having a vision of how much land there is and how much potential, sort of a visualization of what we're talking about, so that we could see both the locations, which would also help us understand the ability to provide local reliability. So I think this has got to be made more tangible. And again, because as Matt knows, the PUC tends to view these things as not connected one to another, but simply micromanaging individual proceedings. I think a bigger vision that could be presented by a broad group of stakeholders, in particular the environmental justice stakeholders who crave and demand more investment in their communities, and that's exactly what community solar could do. So I think you have to approach this a little bit like a campaign, and you have to have a goal, and you have to have a vision, and you have to make it tangible, and then we have to talk about the policy combinations that are going to be needed. So a vision of the landscape and the future, as well as what combinations of policy. Again, I think Matt's chart is a very good start, or his slides. But in addition to the policy, we need to have the vision and the examples so that people can see what we're talking about.
Looks like Ron has a question.
I recognize that we're coming to a close, but I wanted to, Charles, as you listen to this, trying to make some sense from the point of view of the legislature, I appreciated your overview and your commitment of Assembly member. What do you make of where we are now?
Yeah, I think it's a lot. I think we've all kind of, it's a lot to take in. I think there's a lot of kind of concerns about the recent decision and the viability of that decision. I think we're hoping that we're all moving towards kind of what California needs, which is kind of wide scale adoption of community solar. And I think as Matt was saying, we really need kind of a very large program that touches many parts of the state, especially those that have been kind of historically locked out. I think talking about kind of what the next steps are, the PUC did kind of leave it open for that second phase of the proceeding to try to figure out kind of the details that weren't figured out in the proposed decision. I think that's where kind of we can continue conversations and continue that work to ensure that the voices that we've brought together are being heard. I think that this webinar is a great opportunity to bring some of those voices together and kind of discuss them as a panel. But a lot more discussions I think are needed. We've had a lot of great conversations with the PUC and the governor's office, and then the committee consultants in the legislature to try to educate them on kind of what this newer industry might look like in California. It's kind of new, but it's not new. We've had it technically going for 10 years, like Derek said, but really at the scale that we're hoping to see, we haven't really begun to see that yet. So I think what we're trying to do is see what has worked in other states and really try to replicate those successes here in California. I think as a legislature, and then to speak to Erica's point, we really are sensitive to cost shift and the increasing rates. I think it's something that, especially here or especially in San Diego, we hear all the time from our constituents. It's top of mind for pretty much any community coffee that my boss has, those town halls that he puts on. The rising rates are a huge issue, and I don't think that that's going to go away, especially as the climate keeps changing. Some of those risk factors get worse. So we do need to think about cost shift and that rate conversation, but we also, I think, need to really be aggressive. And in some of these areas like community solar, I think we really need to be very aggressive to meet the goals that we've set out as a state. And with 2316, with the net value billing tariff, I think we've brought together a pretty unprecedented group, and we want to keep that momentum going. So I know we have very little time left, so I'll leave the rest to everyone else.
Okay, well, one of the things that I'm thinking is that that we're all on this panel sort of thinking in the same direction right now. And if we can use the information that's been presented here and focus on the takeaways, that we may be able to come together again as almost as a group to approach the CPUC and others, the governor's office, to discuss what we feel the barriers are and what some of the solutions to those barriers might be. Having said that, John, do you have a closing statement or anything that you'd like to add?
No, other than I think what we need is both a vision and a plan, an action plan that shows how this could be accomplished, and save money for other purposes, as well as reduce the cost shift from net metering. I think, but I don't think people know what we're talking about yet. When you say community solar, I think the idea that you've got all of this land and commercial rooftops that could be used, but we don't have a way to get it done. And so I think that vision, both of the policy side and of the potential, is how to get this framed in a more constructive and successful way.
Tremendous. So what I would say is that the Solar Valley Consortium will reach out to the participants in this webinar and see what we can pull together. I would like to thank the participants. It's been very interesting. It's been very illuminating, no pun intended. And I'm very grateful to all of you for participating. So thank you very much.